Jammed in the middle of what has mostly been a season from hell, the Philadelphia 76ers have one entirely important positive storyline that has made its way to the forefront of discussions. That being that Tyrese Maxey has arrived on the main stage and has taken his level of NBA stardom to the next level at a far more rapid rate than I think any one of us could have hoped. I want to dive into what this means for the Sixers team in the short and long term, why I think the hierarchy of the team might be slightly different than what many of us might have expected leading into the year, and how I think a lot has changed from the long-term perspective of how this Sixers team can be built out to be a sustainable winner for the long-term future. So let's dive right into things. I'm going to start off. I'm recording this ahead of the Utah Jazz game, so there will be one more game in here. But looking at Tyrese Maxey's past 7 games, we're talking about 33 points and 12 assists, 32 points, 10 rebounds and 8 assists, 27 points and 3 assists, 23 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, 40 points, 5 rebounds with 6 made three-pointers, 22, 3 and 2, 25, 11, and 14. A triple-double there, that being in Joel Embiid's first game back, the first time that we saw the trio of Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey all together. And I think that is the main core of my story, is I think Joel Embiid certainly still the guy at this current time, but I think the baton's being passed a little bit quicker to Tyrese Maxey than I personally expect to be the case. This dude is still just 24 years old, and to dive into what exactly he's brought from the season-long perspective, we're talking 25.7 points per game, 5.4 assists, definitely a significant growth as a playmaker from what we've seen this season, also adding 3.9 rebounds per game, and I did want to make sure I emphasize the shooting splits here, that 42.1% from the field, just 33.7% from 3, but these are moving entirely in the right direction. This is a guy who's shot below 30% for most of the season, and that is one kind of difficult conversation that I did want to get into, is it's very crystal clear to me how much he benefits from playing alongside Joel Embiid. The gravity that he commands, the defensive attention that is entirely forced on Embiid, opens looks for Tyrese Maxey. What we have yet to see, and I think that is probably the next step for Tyrese, is when you can start creating those looks and knocking them down at a regular rate. It's very clear when you dive into, and this has been the case for the entirety of his career, how much more efficient he is as a catch and shooter compared to those self-created looks, the step backs. And while he can still do them, yes, it's great that that's a part of his bag here. When you dive into just these shooting splits there, that he's just going to hit a significantly higher percentage when he's catching it on a wide open look, when Joel Embiid's catching a double, compared to when you are taking a guy off a dribble, getting to your step back and creating a shot here. But to speak on what I would say is the most exciting area of Tyrese Maxey's game that is improving, has nothing to do with putting the ball in the hole. It is the defense. And I'm going to start off with this tweet out here from Jackson Frank, who says, Tyrese Maxey's defensive growth is very evident this year. Far more physical and able to withstand contact at the point of attack, slides over screens, really lively with his hands on and off the ball. A career-high steal rate is double his previous best, and his the EPM is also a career best. Now, to talk about his stats overall here, you can see the season-by-season progression, and most notably what I want to point out here is the steals. That 2.0 per game this season, 1.0 was last year's career high, and this is legitimate. These are not cheap steals that are being tossed in his lap here. I see the effort. I see the work rate. I see the way that this guy fights around screens, constantly has his hands active, is getting in passing lanes, both when it's his man and somebody else's there, and you can see across the board some of these other sort of changes here, that the assist, a slight step back, and I think once again that's going to be directly correlated to playing alongside Joel Embiid. We do see the shooting numbers. You can see that there is room to grow here from what we have seen from him the past years, just 42.1% from the field so far this season. For his career, he's a 46.3% shooter from the field, shot 45% from the field overall last year, and the three-point numbers is what I really do think is important to note here, that when you look at the progression of Tyrese Maxey, that was the knock on him coming out of college, that he was not a good enough shooter. That changed pretty quickly, that he shot just 30.1% from beyond that three-point arc as a rookie. That jumped to 42.7% in his second season. That was top 3 in the NBA that year, and then he further increased that the following year, up to 43.4% last year on increased volume at 6.2% or 6.2 long-range shots per game. Now, last year, we saw the volume further increase and the efficiency dip a little bit. Now, while he was launching 8.1 3-point attempts per game, only connected at a 37.3% rate. I think this also was entirely linked to the lack of availability of Joel Embiid and him not having those clean looks to get off, and we're sort of seeing the same exact thing this year with this 33.7%. But I did want to kind of bring up that defense conversation. This is real from Tyrese, and I thought the Celtics game was a very clear example of that. Now, Tyrese himself is well aware of this, and I love this quote. This fired me up from Tyrese right here. Shout out to Austin Krell, who tweeted, Tyrese Maxey and why he's having a career year in steals. Quote, I look online and watch everybody say I can't play defense, so I tried to play some defense. And for all the critiques of, the online bullying and everything else that goes around with the Twitter world and everything else, I love that this is a motivating factor for Tyrese, and I think that shows a little bit of mental toughness too. And this is not just, lip service or him speaking things into existence. It's there. It's happening. That he's able to match up with these guys. Now, in the short-term basis, I think the offense is the story. For how much can he take on, how quickly, how much of a focal point of the Sixers offense can he truly be? But I think from the long-term perspective, when speaking about what is the proper way to round out a roster around guys like Tyrese Maxey with Jared McCain in that future, pass the baton. That is the next era of Sixers basketball. But for the short term, you have an opportunity, or for the long term, you have an opportunity to have a guy who is no longer going to be a defensive negative. I think that is fair to assess at this point. I'm not ready to say that Tyrese Maxey is going to be winning a defensive player of the year anytime soon. I think that's incredibly difficult to do for a guard in general, particularly one that is 6'2" with the physical tools that Maxey has. He's going to make most of his impact felt on the offense end, but all that we can ask for is for him to be passable defensively. And I think he's more than that at this point. That I would argue that he's fitting that build of like a Kyle Lowry, like a Mike Conley, guys that have stuck around the league as positive defenders despite their size and frame. And I think that's a part of the value of having guys like Kyle Lowry on this roster. I hear you for all the complaints about him playing too much. I get it. I think Kyle Lowry himself would be the first one to admit that, to say this role of the actual on-court presence is far larger than I ever expected to be the case. And I think that was the case last year as well. When you look at that playoff run where he was starting games, would not have happened if DeAnthony Melton didn't have the back injury, but that is how the cards fell, and Kyle Lowry was the next man up. I think it's sort of been a similar situation this year. We've seen Jared McCain tear his meniscus. We've seen a variety of injuries go down. Tyrese Maxey included in that with the hamstring issue that he battled there. That I don't think the intention was for Lowry to be as much of an on-court part of this Sixers team has proven to be the case. I think it was there to be a leader for the guys like the McCains, like the Maxies, and we're seeing defensively how that has really translated to Tyrese overall here. Now, to speak a little bit about the offense, because I do think this is important, I think Tyrese has taken it a little bit more personal in recent games since a little bit of the dip in the standings. Now, to speak about just December as an outlook here, that the top 5 leading scorers in the entire NBA in the month of December. Number 1, no surprise, was Nikola Jokic, 351 points, and shout out to Tommy Beer who tweeted this. That was really what he was getting at with this tweet, was just how excellent Jokic has been. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander next with 291 total points scored. Victor Wembanyama next at 262, and then there's Tyrese Maxey at number 4 at 255 there. That is who this dude has translated to be. Now, who is the true alpha on the Sixers team? I don't think we really need to have an answer to that just yet. I think what level of physicality that Joel Embiid is at when the moment matters most and when we get to that stage of the playoffs is really going to answer that question there. I think if we look back to last year's playoff and to speak on what we've seen from Joel, certainly a more mild output than what was the case last year. But when speaking from what we've seen from him, 21.3 points per game this year, 7.0 assists, 3.9 or 7.0 rebounds, 3.9 assists. The shooting splits down as well at 43% from the field and 28.9%. When you flash back to last year's playoffs and the version of Joel that we saw, he still brought it. He still had his 50-point performance. He still had his games where his impact was certainly felt, and that being with a bum knee and half a face as he battled the Bell's palsy there. I don't mean this as an attack on Joel, but in all honesty, what happened there? It was fourth quarter time. Turn the keys over to Tyrese Maxey. And I think that's what we're seeing more than ever with this Sixers team, as maybe the baton is being passed a little bit quicker. I've said forever that I think there's very much a world where the best version of Joel Embiid is not him leading the league in scoring like has been the case for the past 3 years. Maybe it is him having increased effort, rebounding the basketball, and playing defense, and just averaging a cool 20, 10, and 6. Like, that is still a highly effective basketball player, but that only works when you have guys that are capable of taking some of that scoring load off you. I think sometimes Joel Embiid's level of defensive ability gets overlooked because of what an offensive talent he is. Let's not forget that when this man first came into the NBA, all that he said is, my goal is defensive player of the year. I want to be one of the best defenders in the sport. Well, it turned out he's way more than this, as he's led the league in scoring twice, really 3 times, except it did not count last season because of the games played. But regardless, this is a team that in some form, the trio of Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid just has to be good enough to match up with the biggest threats in the league here. If that means Tyrese Maxey's leading the charge, so be it. I do think he is taking these next superstar steps right in front of our very eyes. Now, I'm not ready to fully hand him the keys of the franchise just yet. I know that Joel Embiid has proclaimed him that he deserves that franchise or that nickname of the franchise there. but I could not be more encouraged from the version of him that we've seen, particularly in these recent weeks. So let me know if you guys are with me, and what is the ceiling that you would put on Tyrese Maxey. Initially, I said maybe best case scenario, like a top. I'll actually take it even back a little bit further. I was a Maxey guy since before the draft. I had a chance to interview him in the pre-draft process, and the version of him, the personality that we all see on an every night basis, jumped out to me. I dove in, I got in the film, watched a bunch of his college tape, and I remember the Michigan State shot in particular is one that really sticks in my memory. I remember watching that live, but when going through the pre-draft process and really diving into his film, I was like, there's something here. This kid's going to be pretty special. And I remember writing in my individual draft notes that I thought he had top 50 NBA potential. Turns out I crazy undershot that, as I think he's already far better than that. Very clearly a top 50 NBA player. I think very clearly a top 30 NBA player, to be perfectly honest with you. And when thinking about his true ceiling, I at one point thought there was no world in which we could have these conversations, but I think there is a potential for Tyrese Maxey to be the best player on a championship team. There's still a lot of room until we get to there, and hopefully not during the Joel Embiid era, but I will just say the future is bright for Tyrese Maxey specifically and the Sixers franchise as he continues to be a part of it. So shout out to Tyrese for continuing to take those steps in development. Shout out to you guys for tuning in this video here. I want to hear it in the comments. What is your peak version of Tyrese Maxey? How good can this guy truly get? Let it rip in the comments. As always, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here, and I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.